Hello, and welcome to our webinar this evening, Self-Care for Care Partners, Taking Care of Your Own Needs While You Care for Another. My name is Nicole Imgrund, and I am the owner and director of River's Edge Counseling Center. If you haven't joined us before, this webinar is part of a series of webinars, Wellness Matters. We have a couple of them every month, and you are always welcome to join us. We have one more coming up in our spring series here let's see, what do we have coming up? Know Thyself, Personality and Happiness with Warren Tews, and that is on June 8th, so coming up quickly in about a week. And we just published on our website under our events page all of our Wellness Matters webinars for fall. I think we've got 8 or 9 of them. So take a look at those and maybe put some in your calendar as well. A couple of other announcements before I introduce our facilitator this evening as well. We have an event coming up, and I'm going to try to share the poster here with you. Kind of do it this way. It's called Celebrating Resilience. And it's with Tarek Haddad, who is the founder of Peace by Chocolate. You may have heard the story of the Haddad family, a Syrian family who came to Canada, had a long journey to Canada. And after their chocolate factory was destroyed in Syria, when they came to Canada, they were able to rebuild that business. And it's a beautiful story of community, the community that was built up around them in Nova Scotia, supporting them. And it's just a wonderful story about resilience and about entrepreneurship as well. So he's going to come and speak at the Arden on October 26th. And and all of the proceeds to that event are to the food bank. So we're really excited. Also, Jessica McMahon, who is an Indigenous classical artist, is going to play for us that night as well. So I hope you can join us. And one last announcement. We're really excited to be starting something a little bit new at River's Edge. We are starting some more programs and groups to help serve people's needs in the area of mental health and wellness. And just this week, on a couple of days, I'm about to publish all of the new programs and start registration. I think actually you'll be able to see them on our website this evening already if you wanted to look. It's under programs, some sampling of what we have coming up in the fall. The Compassionate Road to Building Self-Esteem, talking about puberty with your preteen girls, teen wellness, embodied stress management. We have an adult grief group, which we've been running for many years, but also a children's grief group coming up. We have a group called The Core for men, and another one called Getting Through the Tough Stuff, a workshop to support teens or parents of teens that are going through self-harm and other really tough situations. So some of them are a number of weeks, maybe 7 or 8 weeks. Some of them are just a few or a one-time workshop. So quite a bit of variety. I'm pretty sure they're going to fill up quite quickly. So if you get a chance to look at those, we would love to have you or just answer questions about them as well. So that's some of what we have coming up here at River's Edge. Now for our presenter this evening, we have Alana Wright. Alana is one of the graduate students at River's Edge Counseling Center. We've been really fortunate to have her since September, and she's with us until the end of August. She just very recently completed her Master of Arts in Counseling and Psychology. So congratulations on that, Alana. It's a wonderful milestone. Throughout her career, Alana has worked with a wide demographic of individuals, including youth, adults, and seniors. Her work experience has been within the nonprofit sector, with recent experience supporting individuals impacted by neurodegenerative diseases and their care partners. So yeah, thus her interest and expertise in the topic that she's going to present to us tonight. At River's Edge, Alana works with teens and adults, and she practices from a solution-focused approach primarily. In her practice, Alana wants to ensure that every individual is cared for while ensuring their needs are met. Additionally, she hopes to create a safe and compassionate environment throughout her work. Alana is excited to present to you all tonight. She wrote that intro, so she's genuinely excited. I'm not just saying that. I know one thing, we're really excited to hear this topic. It's so needed, and I was so happy when you suggested it, Alana, because I know it'll be a good resource for our website as well as the people who are here tonight. So Alana thinks her presentation's about 40 minutes or so. It might be a little bit longer or shorter, but however long it is, we will have a few minutes at the end to answer questions, take some of your comments. So I'll keep my eye on the chat in case there's any technical issues as we go. And we'll look at the Q&A at the end of her talk. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Alana.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Hey, I will just share my screen here. Prior to starting, though, I do want to give a little bit of a heads up. I'm sure some of you may be experiencing the thunderstorms as well. I did have a little brief power outage earlier. It seems to be okay now, but if things cut out suddenly, I apologize, and I'll get back onto it very quickly. But I'm super excited to be here and talk to you guys about self-care for care partners. This is kind of my wheelhouse. I've worked closely with care partners over the past 2 years, so I'm very excited to be giving you guys this presentation. So I just kind of have an agenda to give you an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. So we'll have an overview of caregivers. Who are they? What do they do? Some of the benefits and risks that can be associated with caregiving. We'll take a look at caregiver stress and identifying some of those signs of stress. We'll have a brief little discussion about caregiver burnout before we kind of go into the big stuff, where we're talking about the importance of self-care as a care partner, some stress management strategies for care partners. And then we have like a little interesting topic at the end talking about ambiguous grief and loss, what it is, how we cope with it, what does it look like? And then I do have some resources at the end to throw out to you guys, although they're one of many. So hopefully you guys will be able to get something out of this presentation today. So to start, caregivers, who are they? So a caregiver is an individual who provides care to a person or a group of people who need help caring for themselves. So caregivers can be health professionals who are employed to do this job. It could be a family member, it could be a friend, or it could even be a social worker. I think it's very important to stress that although we do have health professionals as caregivers, we also have kind of the people within our own lives who are caregivers. So generally, caregivers provide care to children, the elderly, any individuals with chronic illnesses or disease, people who are disabled either at home or in the community, or in a healthcare setting. I think it's also important too, you may have heard this term before, but we're kind of in the sandwich generation. And with the sandwich generation, these are the caregivers who are maybe caring for aging parents, but also caring for their own children. Sometimes they go a little bit unnoticed, especially if you are caring for able-bodied children. But regardless, you're still within the sandwich generation and you're caring for more than one individual. So what do caregivers do? So caregivers provide assistance in the following areas, although it could be many more. These are just a few examples, but personal care is a big one. They might be responsible for an individual's financial or legal affairs, helping them out around the home, whether that's cleaning, cooking, or just kind of everyday mobility things. Transportation, or even if you're just orchestrating someone's care by, getting home care into the home, or getting resources and services provided for the individual, that still quantifies you as a caregiver. So there are some benefits to caregiving. So it's really great. You get an opportunity to develop new skills and knowledge. You get a chance to provide compassion and love to an individual, and you get to develop your own new relationship and memories too. Caregiving can be a very beautiful experience, although there are some things that come alongside it that make it a bit more challenging. In my opinion, the benefits definitely outweigh some of the detriments there. So some of the risks that are associated with caregiving, caregivers do have an increased risk of developing a stress-related illness, especially if they're kind of not mindful about keeping track of their own stress, their own personal care. You can be more susceptible to developing an illness related to stress. Generally, it can lead to an overall lack of self-care. Sometimes if we get really caught up in, taking care of somebody else's doctor's appointments and eye appointments or whatever it may be, we forget to do our own. Sometimes caregivers can be more susceptible to substance use or abuse. There can be a decrease in preventative health care, and also kind of going back to, maybe not following up with your own appointments as much. And there's also an increased risk of developing anxiety or depression. Oh, so some of the potential sources of caregiver stress, I mean, there can be a lot of things, but these are kind of some big ones that I've seen come up quite a bit. The initial transition into the caregiver role can be quite stressful. It might not have been something that you anticipated that you would ever be taking on. You might not have necessarily kind of expected all of the things that come with caregiving, and it can make it difficult to transition into the role, which might lead to a little bit more stress. If you're competing with demands such as your work or your own personal life, that can definitely increase your stress. The overall physical and emotional strain of being a caregiver. If there's a change within the relationship with the person you're caring for, that can also be a big source of stress. And sometimes it can be hard for us to acknowledge that that's the reason for stress. There might be some feelings of guilt that come along with that. And then finally, isolation from social support. Sometimes we can get so wrapped up in caregiving and being there for the other person that we forget about our own social network and communicating and connecting with them. So we've talked about stress a lot, but what is stress? So stress is a normal part of everyday life, and it is categorized as an emotional or physical reaction to events. So for example, when we experience stress, we can feel sadness, which might be our emotional reaction. But then you might notice when you're stressed out, you're feeling really nauseous, and that would be kind of the physical reaction. So it's different for everyone. It could be, you might feel tightness in your chest. You might be tense in your shoulders. It can be anything and everything. But it is important when we are stressed to kind of track our bodies and kind of note what we're feeling. So there is what I like to call positive and negative stress. So positive stress is something that is generally short term. It can allow us to push ourselves to the fullest. It might be you kind of use that stress to pursue and push forward through adversity. Or it might be a happy event, because happy events can be positive, but they can also be stressful. On the other hand, negative stress, it can be due to having a lot of stressors all at once, or stress that is chronic, long-term, and persistent. So when we're looking at ourselves as caregivers and the stress, it's important to kind of categorize it, whether it's a positive or a negative, because that can kind of help us deal with it accordingly. So I think it's important here to kind of go over the signs of stress related to caregiving, both physically, emotionally, and mentally, and behaviorally. These are really great things to be aware of because it can serve as indicators of when the stress might be getting too much for you. Sometimes we don't realize how stressed we are until we're at that breaking point. So if we're aware of some of the signs ahead of time, it can possibly help us mitigate from getting to that burnout point. So some of the physical signs of stress that are related to caregiving could be headaches, muscle tension, digestive problems. You might have changes in your eating patterns. You might have sleeping difficulties or even a sleeping disorder. Heart problems, high blood pressure, which is pretty common, alongside breathing difficulties. These are just a few examples of some of the physical signs of related to stress, but they are pretty common amongst caregivers. So some of the mental and emotional signs of stress related to caregiving include increased feelings of fear, anxiety, anger, irritability, guilt, or worry. Or there can be like feelings of pessimism, lack of care, memory loss, and confusion. Additionally, lack of concentration, difficulty making decisions, and decreased problem-solving skills can also be a sign of stress. And then finally, from a behavioral perspective, so some things that we might notice are nervous habits, such as, fidgeting or biting your nails, shaking your leg, pacing back and forth. It can kind of escalate a little bit to yelling, throwing things like crying or screaming. It could be something like giving up hobbies or interests you once enjoyed, friendships, those social connections. Or it could be like related to your health, where you're maybe overeating and not exercising like you used to. So I think it'd be great if we kind of just take a moment here, and, think about those things. Is there any indicators that you've noticed in yourself? Any signs that you might not have picked up on before? Just a little something to think about. So part of the reason why we talk about the signs is, again, hopefully if we kind of pick up on some of those stress indicators early on, we avoid getting to the point of burnout. So we want to avoid burnout by kind of engaging in healthy habits to begin with, but unfortunately, burnout is something that is pretty common and a lot of people experience it, unfortunately. So burnout is a state of emotional and physical exhaustion. It's generally caused by stress that is chronic and excessive, and it may not have been effectively managed previously. So when you're feeling burnt out, generally it's like a depletion of energy or just extreme exhaustion. Sometimes it might be hard to keep your eyes open, even though like you can't sleep. You might have a negative thought process, like everything's out to get me, the world's out to get me, and just feeling down about almost everything. And then also just reduced efficacy. You might not be as efficient as you once were. You might be kind of dropping the ball on things that you normally don't drop the ball on. But hopefully we never get to a point of experiencing burnout. But if there is a point that you do experience burnout, it's important to kind of take a step back. Like, let's assess what might have caused or impacted the feelings of burnout. Let's take a break, put everything down. You can always come back to it. And then kind of make those appropriate little tweaks and changes to hopefully avoid burnout in the future. Burnout's never fun, and we obviously don't want to get to that point, but I think it's a great learning opportunity for what to use future forward. So one of the ways that we avoid kind of feeling a lot of stress and burnout is engaging in self-care. So I think it's really important. Like, the most dedicated workers always need a vacation. And I think that's especially true of caregivers. If you are burnt out or you're feeling very stressed, you can't provide as quality of care as you may like to. So it is really important to kind of engage in some of these things early on, so you can be the best version of yourself for your person, and you can also feel like the best version of yourself while taking care of another one. So these are some examples of just some self-care activities that you can engage in. Practicing gratitude. That's a very big one that I love to encourage not only my care partners, but also their person to do together. What are 3 things you're grateful for that day? What are 3 things you're grateful for that month? It could be anything and everything, but it's a nice way to kind of bring things into perspective and focus on the positives. Some people find spending time in nature to be really healing and peaceful. Yoga, meditation, and massages are another great form of self-care, especially if you notice, for example, that you carry a lot of physical or some of the stress, like physically, like say in your shoulders. A massage can kind of help lower some of those physical indicators. Painting, gardening, and cooking, there are nice little creative outlets that act as a form of self-care. Exercise, healthy eating, they're pretty basic ones, but they can definitely go a long way. Journaling is a great form of self-care. There are so many prompts out there on the internet for caregivers. So if you're ever interested in beginning journaling, I would really recommend kind of Googling some of the caregiving prompts. It can definitely make you think about things that you may not have thought about prior, and it kind of opens the door to maybe some feelings you didn't realize you were experiencing. Making sleep a priority is a huge thing for care partners. You may have been able to stay up till midnight before being a care partner, but it is a lot of physical and mental energy. So make sure that you are moving your sleep accordingly to ensure that you're getting enough of a quality sleep. Taking a day off and doing absolutely nothing could be a form of self-care. going for walks or volunteering or participating in a hobby. Again, some of those kind of go back into the giving back things, but it can really provide some reward internally. So kind of let's talk about some steps for managing caregiver stress. We spent all this time talking about it. Now let's put it to action. So first and foremost, I think it's most important to be realistic and know what you're dealing with. It can really help you with planning your next course of action. So start by understanding the disease and the condition that you're caring for. Some diseases have symptoms that may impact you as a caregiver. So for example, let's just say you are caring for an individual who has Parkinson's or severe depression. One of the symptoms can be apathy. So showing a lack of interest in, not showing having a lack of interest in things. So as a care partner, let's just say you didn't understand the disease fully, and you were dealing with someone with apathy. It can be challenging dealing with someone with apathy. And if they're not interested in engaging in any of the activities that you've planned for them, you might take that a little bit personally. However, if you know a little bit more about the disease and recognize that it's a part of the disease, it can be a little bit easier for us to kind of manage our own feelings around that, because it's not you necessarily, it's the disease. It's also important to recognize what you can and cannot do. Know your limitations. Nobody on this planet can do absolutely everything. So make sure that you're accessing some of those programs or services that may be able to support you and your loved one. So carrying on, building upon your own general health. This goes back to ensuring that you're following through on your own doctor's appointments, exercising regularly, eating healthy, ensuring that you're taking care of yourself first. And then, make changes to the situation where possible. So this can be done through things such as assertive communication, arranging practical help, accessing counseling for yourself, or even joining a support group. If you notice in the situation, perhaps you're struggling to communicate with your care partner, it might be great to have a sit-down conversation with them and outline your expectations while hearing theirs. You might realize that, it's a lot for me to help my person get dressed in the morning. So, maybe I'll arrange practical help by calling home care. So then kind of some things that we can do to manage our own stress is to practice some relaxation techniques. So these can be something such as stretching. So it could be like yoga, progressive muscle relaxation, visualization, or mindfulness. So I'll kind of get into each one here. So progressive muscle relaxation is actually one of my favorite strategies. So this strategy teaches you kind of how to relax your muscles through a two-step process. So essentially how it would work is you're going to tense the muscle group in your body, such as our hands. So we'll tense up our hands. We're going to squeeze them as hard as we possibly can. And then we release the tension and we kind of observe how our muscles feel when we relax them. So it goes through quite a different, all over your body. It could be with your feet, it could be with your calves, it could be with your shoulders, it could be with your face. And it's to help lower your overall tension and stress levels by reducing some of those physical symptoms of stress. So there's a lot of progressive muscle relaxation activities out there. Some of my favorite ones are actually available on YouTube, where you can kind of listen to someone talk, guide you through the relaxation process. And then you kind of can get to sit there and, you might notice like, wow, my shoulders were really tense. Maybe that's something I need to pay attention to when I become stressed. So visualization is a technique to help relieve the symptoms of stress by using mental imagery to achieve a more relaxed state of mind. So before you engage in any visualization exercises, ensure you're in a comfortable environment with minimal distractions. So, maybe remove some of those restrictive pieces of clothing or jewelry, maybe put your hair up, just to help kind of increase your overall comfort. Visualization looks different for everyone, but if you ever have difficulty kind of figuring out what to visualize, you can also utilize prompts. There's a wide variety out there on the internet, and if you kind of struggle to visualize things in your own mind, there's also great videos on YouTube as well where they do the imagery for you. So mindfulness is a form of meditation. So you're going to focus on being aware of what you're sensing or feeling in the moment without any interpretation of those feelings or judgment in the moment. So practicing mindfulness can involve breathing, using guided imagery, and other practices to help relax the body and mind to hopefully reduce stress. So if you're spending too much time focusing on stress throughout the day, you're kind of having those ruminating thoughts, it can be really draining and it can actually increase our stress a little bit. So practicing mindfulness can kind of help direct your focus away from the stress and hopefully kind of take away some of those ruminating thoughts. Okay. Now this is kind of my favorite part of the presentation, talking about ambiguous grief and loss and how it relates to caregiving. So ambiguous grief is kind of a profound sense of loss and sadness that's generally not associated with death. So this form of grief can be a variety of things. It could be grieving the loss of an emotional connection when a person physically remains, or it could be the grief of the future that you once had planned that's no longer there. So it's a bit hard to kind of conceptualize ambiguous grief. So an example could be, let's just say you're caring for someone who has a traumatic brain injury. The diagnosis comes with uncertainty in terms of, the nature of the recovery, the extent of the injury. It can cause people to perhaps behave maybe uncharacteristically, or it could be a little bit more emotional. So in that instance, you may have lost an emotional connection with your person, but they're still physically there. It might be in a different way, but they're there. So that's kind of an example of ambiguous grief. On the flip side, ambiguous loss is kind of unresolved grief that occurs from when someone is physically or psychologically absent. So an example for that is individuals who are facing kind of chronic mental health concerns. They can be physically present, but they're not emotionally or psychologically available. And then the flip side of it is, let's just say you are caring for somebody with dementia. They are generally psychologically absent, but they're physically there. So there's actually types of ambiguous grief and loss. So type 1 ambiguous loss is the physical loss of a person and can be present through the loss of motor functioning of a loved one. So for example, if somebody is struggling with a neurodegenerative disease, the psychological presence of this person is well. However, the physical person may be dependent, which can be difficult for us as caregivers to witness. The type 2 ambiguous loss refers to the psychological loss of a person. So this is a bit more commonly seen or related to people with dementia. So essentially, any diagnosis that may impact a person's memory or personality is a psychological loss. So how does this relate to caregiving? So the ambiguous grief and loss you may feel when caring for another person can make the caregiving experience harder. However, by understanding ambiguous grief and loss, we can work to mitigate some of these effects. So some of the symptoms that are associated with ambiguous grief and loss includes, feelings of hopelessness, like this is never going to get better, I'm stuck, confusion, not really knowing what day it is, what's going on with the day. Maybe you're mixing up appointments. Ongoing stress is a big one. Anxiety and depression, feelings of despair. Again, you might experience some of those physical symptoms, such as nausea, headaches, tension in your shoulders. You might have an inability to sleep, and you might have increased substance use. So coping with ambiguous grief can be difficult as the loss isn't always concrete, which can make it difficult to obtain some form of closure. When we don't have all the information, it can be really easy for our brain to trick us by trying to fill in the blanks and give us a sense of control. This can also make it difficult to kind of cope with the ambiguous grief and loss. So grief looks different for everyone, and there isn't really a gold standard, one size fits all ways to grieve. However, it is really common to move through the 5 stages of grief. So generally, the 5 stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So people who are grieving can kind of go in and out of these stages of grief in no certain order. However, when you've experienced an ambiguous loss, you can be more susceptible to being caught in one stage. Additionally, when you're kind of going through an ambiguous grief and loss, it can be a little bit more difficult for others to recognize if you're grieving at all. So how do we cope? So the first things first, name what you're going through. Ambiguous grief and loss can be sneaky. Sometimes we don't recognize the grief for what it is. Now we're going to name it. And sometimes being able to label your experience can help you with the healing process. Let's work towards acceptance. So acceptance isn't the same as closure. However, when closure is difficult to obtain, we can try our best to make peace with the new reality. So we want to begin by also preparing ourselves for triggers. So sometimes as a caregiver, certain events like holidays or anniversary can be triggering for us. If there's times where you find that you can be potentially triggered, ensure you're increasing your self-care efforts, and where applicable, let's get yourself into a safe environment with people who are understanding and may be able to comfort and support you. Finding meaning through creativity is a great way to cope with ambiguous grief. In a lot of ways, it can be healing, whether it's through journaling, drawing, painting, dancing, gardening. It's a great way to express your emotions. Validate your feelings, like know whatever you feel is valid. Give yourself the permission to feel grief, to feel anger, to feel lost. It's a very tough process on caregivers, and sometimes we can feel like we're on the back burner, but we really want to bring our feelings forward, acknowledge them, and validate them in these instances. Connecting with social support is huge. So depending on the loss, some people in your life might not be recognizing that you're struggling, which that in itself can be isolating. It can be really beneficial to identify a close friend or a family member who can provide you support as you support another. Connecting with resources to support your mental health. It can be a little scary, but attending support groups is a really great way to, validate your feelings. You get to hear other people's experiences and know that you're not alone. It's also a great way to kind of get those duct tape and WD-40 solutions to things. People are really creative, and it's nice to be able to connect with them, hear different strategies that they might utilize that you could potentially implement. Individual therapy and accessing support services can all assist in the coping process. So I do have some resources for caregivers here. So Caregivers Alberta is actually the only organization that's dedicated solely to caregivers. It really strives to empower caregivers and promote their well-being through providing resources, mental health support, and education for people caring for another. The Canadian Centre for Caregiving provides a curated list of resources. It's not exhaustive and it is updated over time, but the resource list includes all provinces, territories, and national resources. Carers Canada is the national coalition that's dedicated to recognizing and supporting caregivers. It's a great place for information on advocacy work, what's going on with the government in regards to caregivers, as well as supporting the needs of caregivers. Caregiving Matters provides podcasts, videos, and resources for caregivers. They have a wide variety of things. It includes like adaptive clothing, books, estate planning, home care, nutrition, and so much more. That's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. I would also encourage you is to check it to see if there is a specific organization for the disease of the individual that you're caring for. So, the Alzheimer's Society is a good one, MS Society, Parkinson Association, all of those pieces. It's really great, to get information regarding the disease, but they also have supports for caregivers through the organizations as well. And that concludes the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for listening.